She had always been the kind of woman who moved through the world like a storm, unpredictable and impossible to contain. Her name was Elena Vasquez, and from the outside looking in, her life appeared to be a series of quiet, unremarkable moments. She worked a standard 9-to-5 job at a small accounting firm in Norfolk, Virginia, lived in a modest apartment overlooking the Elizabeth River, and kept to herself. But those who knew her, truly knew her, understood that Elena was never where she was supposed to be. She had a restlessness in her bones, a deep-seated fire that refused to be extinguished by the mundane rhythm of daily life. Elena's story began long before the day they tried to trap her. It began in the dusty, sun-scorched streets of a small town in Arizona, where she was raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a diner just to keep food on the table. Her mother, Rosa, was a woman of fierce independence and quiet strength. She taught Elena that the world would always try to put you in a box, to label you, to tell you what you could and could not do. "You fight," Rosa would whisper to her at night, tucking her into bed. "You fight with your mind, with your heart, and with your feet if you have to. But you never, ever stop." Elena carried those words with her through every chapter of her life. She fought her way through high school, graduating top of her class despite working nights at a gas station. She fought her way through community college, then university, eventually landing a scholarship to a prestigious law school on the East Coast. But the law, she quickly learned, was a game of technicalities and loopholes, a system that often favored those who could afford to play it best. It wasn't long before the idealism she had once felt soured into a weary cynicism. She dropped out after 2 years, much to the disappointment of everyone who had watched her climb. That was when she met him, Marcus Webb. Marcus was a ghost. That was the only way to describe him. He had spent 12 years as a United States Navy SEAL, disappearing into the darkest corners of the world on missions that would never appear in any history book. When he finally left the service, he carried with him a weight that most people couldn't even begin to comprehend. He was a man of few words, but his presence filled a room. He was broad-shouldered, with a close-cropped beard and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. And he worked as a security consultant, a vague title that paid exceptionally well and kept him moving. They met in a coffee shop of all places. Elena was there, buried in a book, trying to escape the monotony of her own thoughts. Marcus sat down at the table next to her, ordered a black coffee, and proceeded to sit in absolute stillness for an hour. Something about his quiet intensity drew her in. She found herself stealing glances at him, trying to read the story written in the scars on his knuckles and the faraway look in his eyes. It was Marcus who spoke first. "You keep looking at me like you're trying to solve a puzzle?" Elena, never one to be intimidated, met his gaze. "Maybe I am." That was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. They were an unlikely pair, the restless, a sharp-witted dropout and the battle-hardened warrior. But they recognized something in each other, a refusal to be broken, a deep, abiding distrust of anyone who claimed to have authority over them. They became friends, then partners, then something more. Marcus taught her how to see the exits in every room, how to read a person's body language, how to fight dirty when the situation demanded it. Elena taught him that there was still good in the world, that not every battle had to be fought with violence. Together, they drifted. They traveled across the country, picking up odd jobs, helping people who had nowhere else to turn. They became a shadowy rumor in certain circles. Two people who could get you out of a bad situation, who could make problems disappear. They never asked for payment, only for a place to sleep and a hot meal. And they were modern-day drifters, bound by a code of their own making. It was this reputation that eventually caught the attention of the wrong people. The trouble started in a small coastal town in Maine. They had stopped there for the winter, renting a tiny cabin on the outskirts of town, planning to lay low until the snow melted. Elena had taken a temporary job at a local diner, and Marcus was doing odd jobs for the old fisherman who owned the cabin. It was peaceful. It was quiet. It was exactly what they needed. But peace, Elena had learned, was a fragile thing. One evening, a man walked into the diner. He was dressed in an expensive suit, completely out of place among the flannel shirts and work boots. He sat at the counter, ordered a cup of coffee, and waited. Elena knew the type immediately. He was a fixer, a corporate mercenary who cleaned up messes for people with too much money and too little conscience. She served him his coffee with a tight smile and kept her distance. He didn't leave. He sat there until her shift ended, then followed her out into the parking lot. "Elena Vasquez," he said. It wasn't a question. She stopped, her hand resting on the keys in her pocket, her thumb pressing into the sharpest one. "Who's asking?" "My employer has a proposition for you and your friend." "Mr. Webb, we're not interested in propositions." The man smiled, a thin, unpleasant expression. "This isn't really the kind of proposition you can refuse. My employer has a problem, a very specific problem that requires unconventional solutions. You two have a reputation for being unconventional." Elena shook her head. "We're out of that game." "We never were in that game. You have the wrong people." "Do I?" The man reached into his jacket, and Elena tensed, ready to move. But he only produced a business card, holding it out to her between two manicured fingers. "Think about it. There's a substantial reward, more money than you've ever seen. You could stop running. You could build a life." Elena took the card, more to end the conversation than anything else. She looked at it. No name, just a phone number and an address in Washington, D.C. She tucked it into her pocket without a word and walked away. That night, she told Marcus about the encounter. He listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he took the card from her, studied it for a long moment, then snapped it in half. "We leave tomorrow," he said. "First light." But it was already too late. They woke in the middle of the night to the sound of tires on gravel, multiple vehicles, moving fast. Marcus was on his feet before Elena's eyes were even fully open, pulling her out of bed and toward the back door. But they were faster. The cabin was surrounded in seconds. Men in dark tactical gear poured out of the vehicles, their faces hidden behind balaclavas, their weapons trained on the small wooden structure. Marcus had a pistol hidden beneath the floorboards, but he knew it was useless. This wasn't a fight they could win with bullets. He held up his hands, positioning himself in front of Elena as the door exploded inward. "Marcus Webb! Elena Vasquez!" The voice was amplified, cold. "You are both wanted for questioning in relation to a federal investigation. Come out peacefully, and no one will be hurt." Elena felt a cold rage building in her chest. "What investigation? We haven't done anything." The men didn't answer. They were on them in an instant, rough hands grabbing her arms, jerking them behind her back, plastic zip ties biting into her wrists. She heard Marcus growl, heard the thud of a body hitting the floor, then another voice shouting, "Taser! Taser! Taser!" She saw the prongs hit Marcus's chest, saw his body convulse and collapse. She screamed his name, but a hand clamped over her mouth, and she was dragged out into the cold night air. They were separated, thrown into the backs of different vehicles. Elena fought, kicking and thrashing, but it was no use. The doors slammed shut, the engines roared to life, and the cabin disappeared into the darkness behind her. She was taken to a place that had no name. A government facility, she guessed, buried deep in some anonymous stretch of countryside. It was all concrete and steel and fluorescent lights that never seemed to turn off. They put her in a small room with a metal table and 2 chairs. They left her there for hours. She didn't sleep. She sat in the corner, her back against the wall, watching the door, waiting. When they finally came for her, it was 2 men in suits. They were polite, almost friendly. They offered her water, which she refused. They told her that Marcus was fine, that he was being held in another part of the facility, that if she cooperated, they could all go home. "Cooperate with what?" Elena demanded. "There's a man," one of them said, sliding a photograph across the table. It was a picture of a middle-aged man with a thick beard and cold eyes. "He's done terrible things. He's hiding. We believe you and Mr. Webb have the skills to find him." Elena stared at the photo. "You're kidding. You kidnapped us to offer us a job? Consider it a compulsory contract." She laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. "I'm not doing anything for you. You can keep me in this box forever. I don't care." The men exchanged a glance. The friendliness faded. "That can be arranged, Ms. Vasquez. But think about your friend. Mr. Webb is a former Navy SEAL. That makes him a very valuable asset. It also makes him a very valuable subject for certain types of research. The kind of research that isn't exactly comfortable." Elena's blood ran cold. She knew what they were implying. She had heard the rumors about black sites, as about the things that were done to people in the name of national security. She kept her face neutral, but inside her mind was racing. They left her alone again. This time she did sleep, but it was a fitful, nightmare-plagued rest. When she woke, she had a plan. It took her 3 days to execute it. She played along, she answered their questions, gave them vague information about her past, pretended to be cooperative. She ate their food, drank their water, smiled at the guards. She was the perfect prisoner. And all the while, she was watching, learning, noting the patterns of the guards, the timing of the patrols, the layout of the facility as far as she could see. She learned that her room was in a sub-basement level. She learned that there was a ventilation shaft in the corner of the ceiling that was just large enough for a person to squeeze through. She learned that the guards changed shifts at 2:17 a.m. precisely, and that for exactly 4 minutes, there was a gap in coverage. On the 4th night, she made her move. She had been saving a piece of metal from the edge of the food tray they gave her, sharpening it against the concrete floor when no one was watching. It wasn't much, but it was enough to work on the screws of the vent cover. It took her nearly an hour, working in the dark, her fingers raw and bleeding, but finally, the cover came loose. She pulled herself up into the shaft, wincing at the noise the metal made. She froze, listening. Nothing. She began to crawl. The shaft was a labyrinth, branching off in multiple directions. She had no idea where she was going. She just kept moving, following the air currents, hoping they would lead her to an exit. She passed over other rooms, peering down through the grates. She saw offices, storage rooms, a small medical bay. And then she saw him. Marcus. He was in a room much like hers, but he wasn't sitting quietly. He was doing push-ups in the center of the floor, his body a machine of controlled power. He looked up as she passed, and for a split second, their eyes met through the grate. He didn't react. He didn't even pause in his exercise, but she saw the almost imperceptible nod of his head. He knew. He was ready. She kept crawling. The shaft eventually led to a maintenance room on the ground floor. She dropped down, landing silently on the concrete floor. She found a door, cracked it open, and peered out. A long, empty corridor. She slipped out and began to move. She found a control room. Inside, a single guard was watching a bank of monitors, his back to the door. Elena moved like a ghost. She crossed the room in seconds, and before the guard could react, she had her arm around his throat, cutting off his air. He struggled, but she held on, whispering in his ear, "Don't fight. You won't win." He went limp. She lowered him to the floor, checked his pulse. Still there, just unconscious. She scanned the monitors. There was Marcus's cell. There was the armory. There was the motor pool with a row of black SUVs. She didn't know how to disable the security system, but she didn't need to. She just needed to cause chaos. She found the panel for the fire suppression system and pulled the lever. Alarms blared. Sprinklers erupted from the ceiling. drenching everything. Red lights flashed. Through the speakers, a calm, automated voice repeated, "Fire alarm activated. Evacuate immediately. This is not a drill." Elena ran. In the chaos, she made it back to the sub-basement level. Guards were running everywhere, slipping on the wet floors, shouting orders that no one could hear. She reached the door to Marcus's cell. It was locked, but the guard she had taken down had a key card clipped to his belt. She had taken it. The door slid open. Marcus was on his feet, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. He didn't say a word. He just stepped out, took her hand, and together they ran. They moved through the facility like a single organism, anticipating each other's movements, covering each other's backs. Marcus took down 2 guards with brutal efficiency, disarming one and using the man's own weapon to knock him out. They found the armory. Marcus kicked in the door, grabbed a vest and a rifle, and handed Elena a smaller pistol. "We're not out yet," he said. They headed for the motor pool. The garage was chaos, vehicles screeching as panicked drivers tried to get out. Marcus picked the nearest SUV, smashed the window, hot-wired it in seconds. They piled in, and he floored it, crashing through the security gate and out into the night. They drove for hours, not speaking, just watching the road behind them. When they finally stopped, it was at a rundown motel on the edge of a small town. They got a room, paid in cash. Marcus checked the perimeter while Elena stood guard at the door. When he came back, he looked at her. For the first time in days, a small smile touched his lips. "You did it," he said. "You got out." Elena shook her head. "We got out." They sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of the last few days settling on them. They knew this wasn't over. The men who had taken them wouldn't give up. They would hunt them. They would keep hunting them until they were found, or until they disappeared forever. But that was a problem for another day. For now, they were free. For now, they had each other. And somewhere, in a nameless facility, a phone rang. A voice on the other end listened to the report. When it was finished, there was a long silence. Then the voice spoke, low and filled with a grudging respect. "You can't stop her. You can't stop either of them. They're gone." The line went dead.